Let's begin. Today's learning is dedicated to the speedy healing of my father-in-law, Matisyahu ben Sarah, who is gravely ill, and we hope he speedily has a recovery. This week's Parsha is Noach. It is jam-packed. I'll do a quick overview, and then we'll run through it and see whether we can get some insights that we can learn. Ela told us Noach, so it begins with, in the reintroduction of Noach, the commandment to build the ark, the collection of the animals into the ark, the flood and the devastation, after the flood and the devastation, the waiting to come out as the world restarts, the dedication and offerings that Noach brought after coming out, the changes that happened to the world and for Noach thereafter, the covenant of the rainbow, the reestablishment of nation families from the descendants of Noach, the drunkenness of Noach and the loss there, and then the Dor HaFlaga, the attempt to build this city that was some issue that they were going to fight God somehow, and from there the division of language and sending these groups out, and then the generations from Noach down to Avram and the introduction of Avram's family. That's the overview of a jam-packed Parashat. Let's go through it and see some of the things we can learn from this. So it begins with Ele toldot Noach, Noach ish tzadik, Noach is reintroduced here, and it starts off with, these are literally the descendants of Noach, the births of Noach. Yet it doesn't start with his children right away. It starts with defining Noach. Noach ish tzadik. Noach was a righteous person. He was complete or whole in his generation, and with God, Noach was walked. So some commentaries say, well, yes, once we mention Noach, we mention his greatness, but really what it means, the introduction, these are the descendants of Noach, the children of Noach, it means the next verse, Shem Cham and Yafes, and really the titles given to Noach are just, once we mention him, Zecher Tzadik Livracha, we mention the Tzadik, we mention his bracha, his blessing. But Rashi says more. Rashi says another point. Ikar toldosem shel tzadikim maasim tovim. The main of the toldos, the births of a righteous person are their actions, their good deeds. What somebody puts into the world, what the actions and the life that someone lives, the care they give for others, and the righteousness that they show and teach and live, that really defines what they have birthed in the world, what they have given the world. Their descendants, yes, but that's not the main. Ikar of Toldotein Shel Tzadikim is that were good deeds. And so in defining what are the offspring of Noach, yes, it's going to mention his children, but primarily and first, it wants to mention the person, his actions, his deeds, his impact. And that is a very powerful teaching, because there's the value that the Torah is teaching here in a personality and in person trying to do the best they can to perfect themselves and bring the world what they can offer it in a much better way. And so that is an important teaching of the Ma'asim Tovim, the good deeds of Noach, that it defines in the Toldot, the birds, if you would, the offspring of Noach. The Torah here tells us something very important about Noach, and this is a very unique distinction we have to have in how to understand Noach and some of this story. The Torah here tells about Noach. I don't know the English translation out of any of the translations with me, but Esa Elokim Hishalech Noach, with God, or really et, meaning the God. You know, he was one with God, going with God, but it doesn't say halach Noach or holech Noach, but hit halech, which is reflexive. Very interesting conjugation there. It's not halach or holech, but his halech, hit halech. He allowed himself or was taken along with him. A very powerful point. The Torah actually has a commandment for us to walk with God, but it's different. There, the Torah says, Acharei Hashem Elokim or Elokechem, after Hashem your God, telech, you shall go. And here it's hithalech. A difference would, the distinction, to understand the distinction is when you follow someone, so then you're holech acharei, you're going after them, and whatever they say you do, wherever they tell you to go, they go, and it's really them dictating and you going, which is a very powerful thing in and of itself, and that's our commandment, to be able to follow that which we're told to do in order to live a good life and live the life that we're meant to live. However, there's a higher level than that. There's a level where you actually integrate it enough that you reflexively do that which the other is going to do. That's walking side by side. That's where you're in partnership, you're in tandem with the other. And you reflexively go along with that which the other is doing because of how in tandem you are. That's not acharei, behind or after God you shall go, but et, with, really almost a part of. And that's a very powerful thing. That's the level that one would go, at an elevated place. And Noach is described this way in the Torah. It's very, very powerful to be able to integrate that relationship with Hashem to the degree that I'm not following. It's really walking in tandem. Really, that reflexively becomes a part of what we do.
I have a question.
Sure.
Is the use of it part of that reflexive construction, or is et you carrying it an independent meaning?
An independent meaning. The hit in the prefix of halach, the second last word, it says hit halech Noach. The hit is the reflexive part.
But it's et Elohim, right?
Et, right. Et over there is really in place of im, with, but et really is a partnership more than in conjunction with. It's much more, et is like the. It's almost like this one and the same. It's a single entity almost. So
it's also the aleph and the taf means that it's everything.
Yes, it's from the beginning to the end.
It shows up everywhere, and the meaning of it is usually just like glazed over. It doesn't.
Right. We don't have a word like that in English, but it really is a connector, meaning the. So it's really a part of it. It's a oneness, mm-hmm. as opposed to this and that, this together with that.
Okay.
It's a harmonious together. In modern Hebrew, when you have, let's say, a law firm, right? So you don't say, Jones and Jones, right? it's not Jones and Cohen, because the and really is like this and that. So in Hebrew, you don't say Jones v'Cohen. It's Jones et Cohen. It's an entity of these two parties, but it's a single entity. So when the Torah, instead of saying im, with, says et, it really is defining it as combined with, as really somewhat a part of.
And is that a general principle for all of the occurrences of et in the Torah?
Yeah, et really means that's the thing.
Okay.
But it's superfluous. It's like this extra word. So it's always telling you it's that which is exactly the same, or that which is a part of. So throughout Tanakh, when we have the word et, the Midrash will always say, it tells you that which, is exactly a part of it. So if it talks about, let's say, the animal, so et would mean the hides of the animal. It's like every part, right? The parts thereof. So et, it really means over here, and it doesn't say, it could have very well said, and because the translation usually means this, with God he went, and so they would say im ha'elokim hitalech Noach, im, with, and that would mean that very well. But it didn't choose to do that. Hashem said, no, I want to describe Noach as et, with, like as a part of God. And that's really when you reflexively, you're working in tandem with Hashem, you're really not walking behind guided. And that's a very powerful thing. If we think about it, we would sometimes think the opposite way. That somebody who has complete faith in God and just does whatever God says and follows with God, and that's the highest level of faith and emunah and living in a high level. That perhaps would be this level of going with God. But here it's telling us something else. And I want to go ahead, ask a question about the next part, and then come back to this. In the next section, Noach is commanded, because of the destruction of humanity, of people, essentially the end of the last Parsha, talking about the sons of powerful men just taking any women they wanted, essentially just taking people, kidnapping and raping, and it was lawlessness. As it says over here, the land was filled with Hamas, which means theft or egregious lawlessness. So and all flesh became destructive, and it needed to be washed away and restarted. So Noach is told, build an ark. Given the dimensions of the ark, and bring these animals in. You're going to have these 3 layers of the ark, and the question is, wait, what?
We're starting the video.
What value is there to the ark? How can the ark do anything, right? There's this huge flood coming, and you need to save an enormous amount of animals and food, and right. If we think about it, it's a very big structure, right? It'll take 120 years for him to build. Wonderful, but it's not sufficient. It's not really going to survive the flood. So why do it? Why do anything? And this is not my question. Obviously, this is a question that goes back, but the Ramban, Nachmanides, 900 years ago, asked this question and responds. He said, there are 2 levels of doing, working in faith with Hashem. There's a level of Hashem will take care of it, and then there's a level of no, I need to do my part. My part is totally insignificant. I recognize that, but I need to do my part. The former seems at first glance to be a higher level of faith. Right? I don't have to do anything. God is doing everything. But in reality, the faith is much greater when someone does things, recognizing that ultimately my what I'm doing is futile, it takes is Hashem. That's a higher level. And it's a higher level because of the faith, because the recognition of my actions are just my attempts, but the effect, the ability for it to be as effective as it should be is minimal. Right? It's really insignificant. And ultimately, if Hashem wants it to be successful, it will. And if Hashem doesn't want to be successful, it won't. There are so many variables that have to happen for it to work. And it's only through the grace and bracha of Hashem that it will be successful. But it's much harder to live that way in complete connection with Hashem when I actually do all my parts. Because then I feel like I did do it. Right? I did. I did plant. And look at my tomatoes, right? Look at my tomatoes. I grew these, right? These are mine. And you feel very proud. But what made that seed disintegrate in the ground that way and then grow to a tomato plant and then produce the plant and the sun to shine and the rain to come and the winds to come and everything be the right climate and temperature and everything so that it ripened to that beautiful large tomato? And the tomato right next to it is actually not all that great, right? So what made this one so great? All these things don't really necessarily give me pause. They just tell me, yeah, this one I made. That one, I don't know why Hashem made that one so ugly, right? But this one, look at what I did, right? That's somehow how we live. When I'm successful, it's look at what I did. So it's much harder to be able to be successful and really recognize I really still have no idea how that worked. How come I put that plant in, that seed in, and now I have tomatoes, right? Yes, I did it, and yes, I studied where to do it, but ultimately it's incomprehensible, and it really needs so many factors for it to happen. That level of emunah, that living with God, is a higher level of faith. But also because what it means is that all my actions, I'm ultimately waiting reflexively for Hashem to guide them. As opposed to, I'm just going to follow whatever Hashem says and I'm going to go, which is good, right? I'm not diminishing the verse of Acharei Hashem Elokeichem Telechu. You shall go after God. But there, you're just following. What Noach was living, where he can build for 120 years an ark to save the universe, to save the living creatures, and ultimately realize I'm not doing anything. I'm living with God, and I know what I'm doing is totally insignificant for the task. I'm just going to do whatever I can do in my short time, and the rest the Creator is going to do. And that's an elevated state where somebody has to be able to live where they can live in the Koach HaGashmi, they can live within the world of the physical world and interact with it and manipulate it and create with it, but ultimately come back to Shabbat, ultimately come back to, but I can sit back and relax because it's not me. It's all there from the start. It's all the Creator. It's a very powerful thing. We want to feel success, and so we want to own that success. And we work at it, so we deserve some kudos. We pat ourselves on the back. And we need that in order to be able to go forward and continue and do it again. But we have to also see a reality, a truer, bigger reality. I'm utilizing all of what Hashem made and all Hashem gives me in order to make this little bit of success. And even that, kula haiva ulai, in Hebrew, all that work, and maybe it'll be successful, maybe not. I can't even assure outcomes. I can only assure, at best, I can assure my attempts. And even then, right? I don't know. Some days I do better. Some days I'm not. That's the level of hitalech to go along with Hashem, to go along with Hashem at that level of I'm doing mine, but I recognize that it is Hashem's will and Hashem's actions and Hashem's way that makes what happens. That's a very powerful way to live. And Noach was living that way. And so therefore he was in sync, in tandem. He was reflexively going with Hashem, because that was the ability to respond to that which Hashem is saying and guiding, and to be able to do that. So that's this first verse, and the introduction really to Noach. There's a lengthy description of the gathering of the animals and the rain and how long it came. It's a lot to say and see through that. I want to be able to get to some of the other parts, which were the parts of when they came out and the world being rebuilt again. So we're going to skip through to the 8th chapter. And the 8th chapter, which is about Revi'i, when we break the Torah with Aliyot. And so this is verse 15 in the 8th chapter. Vayidaber Elokim el Noach lema. And God, Elokim, in strict justice, says to Noach, Tzei min hateva. It is now time to leave that, to leave the ark. Atav ishtachah v'nechem shebenecha itach. You and your wife, and your sons and their wives with them. It's time to. It's a very. There's a change going into the teva. It says you and your sons, and your wife and your daughters-in-law, and their wives. And here it says you and your wife, and your sons and their wives. And Rashi points out from the Midrash that up until now, they have to abstain, they have to separate, because the world's in a time of destruction. The world is in a time of calamity. It is only after it's time to rebuild that they can now come back together again. It's time to have unity. It's time to have shleimut, wholeness, and tamimut, completeness. And then you can come back. And so that was the introduction here. You have to come back to living and building the world that Hashem intended, that had become so broken. And take all the animals out as well. Fill the land, become fruitful and multiply on the land. And Noach did so. Noach now builds an altar, an interesting thing. And the Torah says, Vayarach Hashem et reach hanichoach. Hashem smelled the reach hanichoach. What is this reach hanichoach? It shows up through Vayikra all the time. What is the meaning of this? That this is now a reason for the divine to want to deal with the human and allow for their continued mess ups, but Hashem make a promise. And what is this reach nichoach? So we're going to go on the simplest levels here. There's obviously a lot of deep Kabbalistic things about this. But I want to talk about two teachings here. One from Rav Hirsch on his commentary on the Chumash. Rav Hirsch in the commentary on the Chumash deals with the word nichoach from the word nacha. At the beginning of Parshat Beshalach, when the Jews come out of Mitzrayim, the Torah says, V'lo nacham Elokim derech eretz Pelishtim. God did not guide them towards the land of the Philistines, but rather took them through the desert. So we see the word nacham or Noach in this word is to be guided, which is different than two other terms of Noach. There's also nach, to place something, to put it down, lahaniach, and there's also to leave something, meniach, right? I'm leaving that behind. There's another word nach, which is nacham, to be guided. Reach nichoach is a spirit of obedience, a spirit of seeking guidance. The human being in making this altar and bringing an offering is saying that I seek assent. I seek a relationship. I seek to come back to having a guidance from you, Hashem. That's a very powerful idea, that the humility of a human to be able to say, I'm fallible. The most I can do is really attempt to do good. But I know that I'm going to be blinded by my wants and needs, but distractions. I'm only going to be able to see a little bit of information. After all, I'm going to miss a lot of things. I can hardly see the present, very little of the past, and none of the future. So, how can I make, how can I judge? So I seek to be guided. I seek to have an outside dominant factor, that relationship with Hashem, to be that spirit of nichoach, of allowing me to be guided. And that's a very powerful thing. And Hashem sensed that Noach was seeking that. I'm coming out into the world and I'm restarting. I'm seeking to be guided. And Hashem says, that's all we need. That in the heart of the human means the ability to take strides to become better and to do good. Perfection? No, it's a human. But attempts to do good with seeking guidance, that's what it's about. So Rav Hirsch says that's the meaning of reach nichoach, the spirit of seeking the guidance, nichoach, to be guided. The other interpretation comes from our teacher, Rav Leuchter, in Israel. It says the word nichoach comes from the word nach, in the word nachas, nachat, to have pleasantness. But pleasantness is the wrong translation, because that's a translation of oneg, ta'anug. Right? That's a pleasant pleasure. Nachat, we saw menucha at last week's parsha as well, where the Torah said that on the seventh day Hashem completed the creation. And Rashi asked from the Midrash, wait, everything was created in 6 days. There was nothing created on the seventh day. So what was created on the seventh day? Ba'at Shabbat, Ba'at Menucha. Shabbos came, Menucha came. What is Menucha? We interpreted that to mean the idea of, yes, you can have all the parts, but until they work in tandem, until you have a whole ecological system, a whole system of the cosmos revolving around each other and really working with each other, you can have all the parts, but you don't have a finished product. Shabbos is that idea of everything is harmonious. The spirit of harmony. Now that scent of harmony, not the spirit, but the scent. The uniqueness that we have of the way we sense the smell of scent, the Midrash tells us that that smell, the scent of smell, is something that the neshama takes pleasure in. The neshama takes pleasure, and it's why we smell besamim at Havdalah, Matzah Shabbos, because we lose our extra spirit, our extra neshama that we have for Shabbos, And so now we need to smell besamim so that the neshama is revived, as it were, right? It gives it pleasure. Now, what does that mean, the neshama? So we say that the neshama is in the mind, in the moach, neshama shabamochi. Our sense of smell, we breathe in. Of course, we breathe in the lungs, but it goes up, and it is a scent that goes directly into our brain, to the cortex. It becomes immediately absorbed. The nerve systems go directly. It's not like the rest of the senses that sort of go through the spinal cord into the brain, but it goes directly. It means I have a spirit, a sense of the inner substance. That's the neshama has something. It doesn't need the body to sense it. It does, obviously. You need the nose and you need that scent of smell. But the idea is that it goes directly to the brain, directly to the neshama. The ability to have that spirit of where the body is responsive to the neshama, that harmony of where our soul is not suppressed by our body and by our desires and by our reactiveness, but rather our neshama is what is in control, and our body is not reactive, but rather is thoughtful and meaningful and intentional. That's the spirit of menucha that Hashem saw in Noach. The willingness, the sense of having the neshama guide the body. And this really works with all korban, with all offerings. It's the idea of ascent, of where I can elevate the animal body in us to an elevated space. So that's this concept of the neshama and the spirit that Noach sensed right here. Going on, Hashem says, okay, I see ki yetzer lev ha'adam ra minu urav. That the simple translation usually is that the heart of a human being is evil from when they're young, and from when they're young, they just have an evil streak in their heart. That's a very depressive interpretation of the human by its creator. But that's not what it means. Malbim tells us that Minu Urav here does not mean from the youth, but due to the youth, because of its youth. The human starts off, as Shlomo says at the beginning in Kohelet, Hashem created the human yashar. Kim asar et Adam yashar, upright. Vehema vikshu cheshbonot rabim. And they seek out all sorts of calculations. That means that we have, from the start, we believe that the human being is created good. There's nothing inherently wrong or evil with the human being. The creator is who created the human being. Even the anger, and even the jealousy, and even the envy, and even the kindness. Everything has the ability to be good and the ability to be bad. It depends on how we use it. We understand kindness can be bad. Kindness can be bad if there's someone who has killed people, hurt people, has done bad, and intends to do more. And they need help. So you're kind and you help them. We understand that's not kindness. Right? It's 1942, and a Nazi officer needs some help. They're hurt and injured. And you know who they are. Kindness is not the right thing right there, because you're helping evil. So we understand that there's a limit to kindness. And the same is that there's a right time for righteous indignation. And that has to come from a place of anger. or sadness, there's a right time for sadness. And that Shlomo says also in Kohelet. There's a time for everything. There's a time for everything. There's a time for rejoicing, and there's a time not. There's a time for dancing, and there's a time for not. There's a time for togetherness and separateness, and everything has a time. So ultimately, every part of the human is good if it's done in the right, it's utilized at the right time and right measure. The problem is that it starts off with youth. And the energy and the power and the freedom seeking and the lack of guidance seeking is there from the start. And that's what Hashem says. I see the heart of the human. There is a yetzer. There is a formation of a thought that is wrong on account of its youth. The youth misguides and then makes it a part of our personality. The personality attributes we have. So, if I have a tendency to let's say kindness, but my youth may tell me that there's no end and no limit to that kindness, and I'll be kind even to cruel people when I shouldn't be kind. That's not the right time to be kind. And that becomes a part of who I am. And that's what this is saying. The recognition that there is a misguidance to how to utilize the good attributes that each person has, and when they are good and when they are not. And that's the Yetzer. And we see this in the Shema. In the Shema it says, and we talked about this in a few of the classes, that we say, "Va'avta Hashem Elokecha," you shall love Hashem your God. B'chol doesn't say libcha, your heart, but it says b'chol levavcha, with all your hearts, right? Levav, double heart. And Rashi quotes the Midrash. It says, b'shnei yitzrecha, with your two yetzers, yetzer hatov v'yetzer hara, with your good and your bad inclination. What does it mean to serve Hashem with your bad inclination? Because there are times that which is a bad attribute, a bad inclination, is actually great and good. We just have to know how to utilize it and use it. We're not ascetics. We don't believe that you have to separate yourself from the world in order to be close to God. Enlightenment does not come only if you rid yourself of your id, of the here and now, of your body. No, you can elevate that in tandem, togetherness. It's the mind over the body, but the body is a part of it. We celebrate everything kadosh, everything holy on a glass of wine. We don't separate from the physical. We just have to know when and how. That's the definition of good. Every attribute, every part. And it's lost sometimes on inexperience, on minut urav, on the youth. And that's, Hashem says, okay, so I see if people want to be guided, the guidance will get there. It'll just take time to grow into that which a person needs to be. The next part says, all the days and the seasons. And here's a very unique thing in verse 22. All the days of the earth, of planting and harvesting, cold and hot, winter and summer, night and day, it does not cease. This is the round of the world. And this is a new thing that wasn't there beforehand. The concept of seasons. Why not? Why is there no mention of seasons prior to Noach, and now there is? So Malbim says that, there's about 150 years ago, he says, look, scientists have now discovered that the world is revolving, Earth is revolving on an axis. It's not upright. And that's why, because it's turned, we have all these changes in seasons and the degrees of the sun and distance and so on. if the earth was on its axis, straight up, then everything would be, the same all the time. And so he proposes that seismic shifts change the axis, and at the flood, so much happened that it changed the axis to where it is, and that's what created seasons, and that's why it starts with Noah. Now, I don't understand enough about this, but I think I do remember a few years ago there was an earthquake that was so powerful that it shifted the axis by like a fraction. The axis that we are
about 6 inches.
Sorry,
About 6 inches.
6 inches. Great, still a tiny fraction. But which one was that? The Fukushima, a few years ago in Japan. That one? Yeah. I just remember it happening, and it struck me. But I think there are theories that indeed these things happen with occurrences, but it wouldn't fit the timeline, at least scientifically in earth sciences. It would not fit the timeline with our count to Noah. Rav Hirsch has a similar theory, which was coming out of his day, which was that the continents were all one, and they shifted as these plates were shifting, and that happened at that point, and that it broke apart in the flood, and that's why you have new concepts of seasons, because you didn't really have, everything was sort of in the middle, and it broke apart to come apart. That also wouldn't fit the timeline of our count. Now, if someone came and told me that they found the midrash that said that that Noach actually happened much longer back to, that wouldn't bother me at all, because we know the numbers and the time in the Torah is not there. Torah is not here to teach us history. It's not here to teach us a chronological timeline. In fact, the Torah often uses terms in chronological numbers that are specifically wrong. The two examples that come to mind right now is the Torah says that we were in Egypt for 430 years, and the Midrash tells us, and Rashi quotes it there on the spot. No, we were 210 years, and the 430 years is a different count. It means something else. Why the Torah chose that term, we can address Be'ezrat Hashem when we get to that parsha. But the Torah is like everything else in the Torah. We don't translate it literally because it has a deeper meaning. We talked about this at the introduction last week, that it's written on a scroll, but it is also a black fire on white fire, meaning that there is a spiritual element that the Torah really, in its essence, is coming to teach us. Another fantastical example is King Shaul HaMelech. Tanakh tells us that Shaul HaMelech was 2 years old when he became, 1 year old when he became king. Ben Shana b'Molcho, Ushnei Shanim Malach, and he was king for 2 years. Never mind that he had grandchildren, right? But he was 1 when he became king. So obviously it doesn't mean he was 1. I'm just bringing that example to show that when the Torah gives us numbers and times, it's not intended for a chronological historical date, because that's not the intent of the Torah. It's teaching us the things we were learning, how to understand ourselves, how to relate with our connection to Hashem and our purpose in life and the struggles of the human, and to become better people and to make the world a better place. That's the purpose of the Torah. Kihem chayenu, because this is our life. V'orech yameinu, in the length of our days. This is what the Torah is for. And so, it's interesting to see Rav Hirsch's theory and Malbim's theory as to why there's seasons here, and does it fit with with the changes to the earth that happen, not in the timeline, but it fits, great. It's a good teaching, but the message really is what we're learning from the Torah. And the Torah is really telling us that idea, that there's things for us to learn, ways to live our lives, and that's what the Torah wants of us. There's a change that happens here, where now Adam, who was not allowed to eat animals, is told now you need to be able to eat animals. Why the change? What happened? So it says Hashem blessed Noach. This is in the beginning of chapter 9, text. Vayivarach Elokim es Noach v'zbanav, vayomer lehem pru u'rvu milu et haaretz. Be fruitful and fill the land, and you will have a certain control over the animals and the fish of the sea, and just like the grasses, Yerek Esav, which you were allowed to eat till now, I give to you the animals to eat. Some say the reason is because, you know what, he saved them, so he deserves to be able to eat them. It's a weak, it's not that would need more explanation to me. He didn't save them. Hashem told him to do that. It wasn't his graciousness and kindness. And it's what needed to happen. So why does he get to eat them because of that? It's like you get to eat them because of that. So I want to give over a teaching from Malbim 150 years ago, really based on a Gemara. The Gemara says that someone who is not dedicated to doing goodness in the world should not eat animals. Someone is not connected to Hashem should not eat animals. So Torah, they don't teach you this all the time, but the Gemara is saying that some people should be vegan or vegetarian at least. The Gemara is saying you have to have a right to eat animals, and that is the concept of elevation. Malbim says that through the process of saving the world and restarting and getting a spirit, this spirit of pleasantness, the spirit of harmony of this body and soul, the spirit of elevation, of guidance, whichever word we want to use for Reach Nichoach, and for the human seeking perfection and elevation of himself. That now brought the human to a level that they are now in connection with Hashem. The way he terms it is, now the human being is no longer a chai, just a living being, but is now a medaber, is now a personality that speaks. That's a change. Now, even though that was there beforehand, but they didn't live up to that level. The human now becomes a medaber, now becomes elevated to a place where they can think and have a personality where they can utilize their thought for good. That elevates when you use the energy from beings that don't have the ability to do that. For that, you are elevating not only yourself, but them along with you, because they are a vehicle, they are energy, they are fuel, they are strength to do good. And if somebody uses the strength for that, uses that as a form of elevation, they are not only elevating themselves, but the world along with them. And that's this idea. Noach, you have now come to a place where you are medaber, where you're utilizing thought and process and mind to perfect yourself and to perfect the world. Utilize the energy of the animal to also elevate that. But the life force of animal cannot be included. The blood may not be taken. You have to take out that blood because that's animal force. And you're trying to elevate to spiritual, to neshama force. And that's what's going on here. That's the Malbim's explanation of this, of this change that happens at this point.
Rabbi, I have a question.
Sure.
Don't we have an echo of that from Gan Eden, where the people were placed in the garden to to have domination over the animals?
Right.
Doesn't
There
that
you didn't-
imply?
There, everything was external. You didn't need to internalize in order to elevate, right? Because everything was external. Even the serpent, right? Even the evil voice was external. It wasn't internal. And having internalized that, humanity went down the tubes.
Right.
Now that you're internalizing how to live that internalized evil voice, that internalized struggle, seeking the guidance of Hashem, seeking to do good, seeking to elevate, to allow the mind and soul to dictate for the body how to live. Okay, so then for you must elevate the animal with you by using animal energy and eating. So that's this idea. So essentially, anybody that's not vegetarian is saying that they're doing good stuff. So got to live up to it at least. Yeah. Oh, is that you're on mute?
We do our best.
Yes, we have to try and live up to that. Yes, to deserve that piece of meat. Okay, the last part. There's a lot to go through. We're going to run out of time. I want to talk about the covenant of the rainbow. Covenant of the rainbow, right? So Hashem says the world is in a process of becoming better. So I make a covenant. What is a covenant? As opposed to a promise, which is from me to you, or you to me. A covenant is a mutual understanding and agreement. That's different than just a promise. It's a covenant. It's a promise mutually to each other. This is what binds us. The covenant of a rainbow is a little bit odd, right? You make a covenant. I'm not going to destroy the world. Okay, you live and try to do good, and I will allow you that opportunity not to destroy the world. What's the rainbow? So again, Malbim is fascinating on this. So what is a rainbow? A rainbow is reflected off of a very thin light cloud. A very thin cloud, meaning little precipitation that's very thin. A dark cloud, you don't get a rainbow. The light will not reflect off it, will not reflect, but refractions. If you look at no clouds, it also doesn't shine. Hashem is saying, here's my relationship with you. If you are purely spiritual, purely mental, purely a cognitive relationship with God, no action, I cannot reflect off of you. If you are completely dark, completely physical, I cannot reflect off of you. If you are light, somewhat physical and somewhat spiritual, somewhat space, and somewhat there, solid, then I can reflect off of you, and not only reflect off of you, but reflect in many ways, in different colors, in different directions that you didn't have before. The human has the ability to reflect so many ways and lights from Hashem. Hashem is saying, my covenant to you is, you cannot be completely physical, just body, animalistic, whatever I want goes, because then light cannot reflect off that. My light, Hashem says, cannot reflect off that. Totally spiritual, in the mind, no connection to the world. The light can't reflect off that. The light reflects off of this balance, where it's a light cloud, a soft cloud. And when it does, it'll reflect rays and colors that you couldn't see before. It'll create dimensions and and directions that were not there before. It's so beautiful in the Hebrew. We can't read it here, but this piece of Malbim it's so powerful. This is the teachings of Meir Leibish Malbim. Unfortunately passed away young, but wrote this phenomenal commentary on the Torah. I don't know if it's been translated into English. But in the Hebrew, it's just a beautiful thing. And if we think about this idea, that's the covenant. Hashem says, here's my connection with you. I don't want the world ever to go down the path that it's gone. You have to realize that the relationship we have is so beautiful. It'll reflect such beautiful colors and light if we live in that relationship. Let's hope that we can do that.